I recently read Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first book of his Bloodsworn Saga trilogy, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a Norse-inspired mythology high fantasy that is a bit gritty and definitely has action and some high stakes, but it still has some emotional depth and intimacy to the characters that really surprised me. We have 3 different main POVs. We have Orca, we have Elvar, and we have Vard. And they each have a very unique story, but they are all kind of navigating this world that is very intense and kind of cutthroat. We are in a world where the gods have died, but their kind of offspring, where they mated with humans, are still kind of rampant in the world, and they are seen as tainted. They are wanting to kind of purge them from the world. Now, there is definitely a lot of action, and it can be kind of bloody and visceral at times, but we're dealing with Vikings and Norse mythology, so of course that's going to be in there, and it is fierce and intense, and you just are kind of like pumping your fist like, yeah, let's go, but it still has this emotional depth to it that was really surprising to me. I was not really expecting that much kind of intimacy with the characters. We're not getting like a ton of inner monologue, but we are getting from the narrator the kind of thoughts and perspectives and emotions of our main characters. And it is intimate. That is the word that kept coming to mind whenever I was kind of reflecting on it and processing it as I was reading. Falling in love with a fantasy, it takes a lot for me, and I feel like even though this is a little bit different as far as my fantasy would go, this is a bit more gritty. I feel like I am going to really enjoy this because of the depth to these characters. I really feel like the world building is a standout feature in this book. We're not having to pay what I call the fantasy tax. It's not a high fantasy tax where you're just getting like this info dump of information. I feel like it is peppered along as far as learning the world and the magic system. I feel like it's explained really well within like dialogue and conversation with the characters. And I feel like when a fantasy writer can do that well, it makes me want to read the fantasy all the more because I'm able to process it with the characters. And even though I don't mind an info dump, I don't mind a high fantasy text, I feel like this is what I lean more towards just because it's a more scaffolded learning. There's some teacher language for you, where it's just one element building on another rather than getting all the information at once. I really feel like this kind of pacing actually reflects a lot of these Norse sagas. And by the end, I was like, this really feels like an old tale of Norse mythology. I feel like this is a fantasy for people who like a kind of slightly more gritty story, but something that still has like emotional depth to the characters. A good balance of action and dialogue, I feel like Gwyn really achieves in this book. So if that sounds good to you, I would definitely recommend. Again, this was 4 out of 5 stars for me, and I would definitely recommend trying it out.